did exactly fair housing, when was it passed? What was happening prior to its passage? Who were what were the forces that really came together to help get that passed? 'Cause it's such a landmark achievement with the fair housing legislation.
Thank you for asking that. I always like to talk about history. It's so important to understand the context, and don't worry, it's not going to be boring. So before America enacted the Fair Housing Act, housing discrimination was extremely widespread. It was kind of standard practice. Private actors denied people housing. They said, we won't rent to these people. We won't sell to these people. That was common. But beyond what businesses were doing, discrimination was baked into government programs. And there were two massive federal investments in home ownership during the 20th century. The federal government said, Congress through its policy said, we believe in home ownership. Home ownership is good for the country. The federal government wants to support it. It helps families build wealth and stability. It helps communities thrive. Home ownership is good. So during the Great Depression, there were like 1 million defaulted mortgages, and the federal government bought up those defaulted mortgages and invented the fixed rate long-term mortgage. So before the Great Depression, most mortgages you had to have a down payment of 50% and pay it off within 5 years. So during this period of the Great Depression, the government said, no, we want to create more sustainable mortgages so more people can access home ownership. So the FHA was invented and they created these 30-year fixed rate loan. But that program was racially restricted. And so over 30 or 40 years, this program helped tens of millions of Americans become homeowners, and 98% of them were white. Um, and the loans were restricted to communities. So it was not just that individuals were becoming homeowners, but entire communities were being invested in, while other communities, the underwriting manual of the FHA said, no, we will not insure loans in these redlined communities. Um, Again, after World War II, when the GIs were coming back, they were starting new families, there was a housing shortage. The federal government invested massive amounts of money to build new housing developments, to build the suburb. A lot of them were in the suburbs. So the government financed the construction. They also financed the mortgages. So millions of GIs coming back got this cheap, it was, very affordable, this new housing they'd constructed, and they got the financing. So again, you have millions of people being helped by the government to become homeowners. Again, it was racially restricted. So those new suburbs that were built, the federal government required racially restrictive covenants on all of those homes. So the black GIs coming back, there were about 1 million of them, even though they could have afforded these cheap and subsidized houses, they were blocked and they were sent back, to the segregated neighborhood that wasn't invested in. And so this
Mm.
happened over generations. And that's why we talk about generational wealth, because some groups in America have been able to build wealth through home ownership over generations, and other groups, because of housing discrimination, were not afforded that opportunity. And so that's what led up to the passage of the Fair Housing Act. And I'll talk about that for 1 second. And then if it's okay, Jose, I'd like to show a little bit of data about connecting the past to the present. Um,
Absolutely, that'd be great.
so the Fair Housing Act was the last of the three major fair housing laws in the 1960s. It was passed in 1968, and it was the hardest one to pass. Um, Folks were more comfortable with integrating businesses and public places than they were with integrating neighborhoods. And so it wasn't until the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King in April of 1968, which is why we observe the Fair Housing Month in April. It was 7 days later that Lyndon Johnson was finally able to galvanize the Congress to pass this law. So I want to show you a little bit of data about how this all comes together, unless you want to comment any on the history at all, Jose.
No, that'd be great if you would like to show us that. That'd be good.
Okay, let's look at a few slides here. Oops, except that's not the first slide. Okay, so here, can you guys see this okay?
Yes.
So here we have home ownership rates by race since 1940. And you can see that they're all sort of rising over time slowly. But check out this gap, okay? So the gap between black and white, this is 2019, but it hasn't changed that much in the last couple of years, is 30 points. You go back to 1940 and the gap is 30 points.
Mhm. Yeah.
So we have not closed this gap.
Right.
Why? Well, the history is a part of it. Let's look at some more data. Here you have the median net worth of a homeowner. Isn't it interesting how much it grew just from 2019 to 2022? This kind of blows my mind. I mean, we all know why. Just by owning a house, you gained
Hmm.
$100,000 on average in equity just over 3 years.
Hmm.
Now you can see the median net worth of a renter. Maybe you can't. I can barely see it down there. But
Yeah.
if this is what's going on over generations, and this group is building its wealth, and this group is sitting here. Meanwhile, housing prices are going up, up, up. So whereas this housing back after World War II was cheap, now if you don't have a lump sum for that down payment, which you would get from generations of home ownership, um, you've got a problem. And that's illustrated on this slide. So on this slide, we show sources of down payment by race and ethnicity. This is from our 2023 profile of buyers and sellers. And you see that white folks, 41%, have the sale of an existing residence. That's they're using that to pay for their down payment. But look at the other groups. It's less than half as much. And this is showing the history, right? This group has had generations of home ownership supported by the federal government, and these other groups were shut out.
Yeah.
Um, so finally, I think this is the last slide I have on this piece. Yeah. This slide it now puts it all together and talks about household wealth. And this is broken down by race and educational attainment. So what you see here, and orange is white, it represents white folks, and blue represents black folks. And what I just want to point out is that the median household wealth of a white family with only a high school degree is $115,000. Look how much education the median black family needs to reach that same level of wealth. They need to have gone to graduate school.
Mhm.
That's because folks that don't have generational wealth have to take on a lot of debt to
Yeah.
get to graduate school. Other folks don't need to take on so much debt.
Yeah.
And then, of course, these folks now don't have, a generational wealth for a down payment, but now they've got a debt to income ratio issue. Even this
Right.
person who's gone to graduate school and may have a really good income. Um, so these are all these sort of historical and systemic factors that have caused that business as usual is not going to close the gap,
Right.
as we've seen.
And another thing I noticed on the other graph where the source of the down payment, I
Mhm.
noticed that and for the Black community, they're having to dip into their retirement at a higher
Yes.
percentage
Yes.
versus in the
Look at
yep.
this. More than 3 times as much.
Hmm.
Oops.
which
Yeah,
which creates other challenges, right? Of quality of
absolutely.
life later on in life. Hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think and it's important, I think, like to look back and seeing some of the data and the graphs. I think it just helps kind of illustrate how so much is tied together over time and how it um kind of led to so much of the problem. What fair housing was meant to do was to, obviously protect consumers, as mentioned, but I think that over time when other efforts were, you know, coming together, such as DEI, I think it was to try to continue to bring other communities, to help other communities rise, not necessarily take away from anyone.
Mhm.
Um, so so right now with there's day-to-day practice. Realtors out there work hard. It's a tough market right now. Everyone's working hard, inventory shortage, and we all want to do a great job for our clients. We want to be, want to be out there representing our people, representing our clients. A lot of times with realtors, their marketing efforts, I know sometimes at the association, we'll get reports of somebody, maybe an advertisement or a social media post. I guess into fair housing behaviors that we may have seen. What are things that members should be careful about with, following fair housing?
Yeah, so we've had some really publicized, highly publicized cases of real estate sales discrimination over the last couple of years. And actually, it hasn't, a lot of it's been stuff that's come up in the media and not even
Mhm.
necessarily someone filing a case. So, who's familiar with the Newsday investigation? If you have not watched this, you need to. This is a hidden camera investigation that was conducted by a newspaper, so not a fair housing group, because their own reporters believed that they were being steered by real estate agents on Long Island, New York, which is a very diverse area, but it's a very segregated area. And their
Mhm.
own reporters experienced when they were trying to buy homes that they felt that they were being steered by their race and their national origin. So they conducted this 3-year hidden camera investigation. And if you haven't seen it, watch it. It's called Long Island Divided. But it really is a case study in what not to do if you want to stay on the right side of the law. We saw things like an agent telling a black buyer that she had to be pre-qualified before she would take her out to see listings, and then the same agent saying to a white buyer who wasn't pre-qualified, "When can you go out?" So this is an example of it's if you want to require people to be pre-qualified, that's fine. You just need to require everybody to be
Mhm.
pre-qualified. And this is kind of the essential point is consistency. If you're going to ask one person for a driver's license, ask everybody for a driver's license. So having those consistent policies and procedures is going to save you a world of hurt. We saw a few other things in there that were troubling. One part that really bothered me was when the people would talk about their fair housing training and they would actually name the behaviors they weren't supposed to do, like steering. They would say, "Oh, I'm not supposed to do steering, but
But
don't live over there."
Yeah.
And that showed us that we needed to have better training. That we needed to have training that was going to resonate with people. And we'll talk about training a little more later. Um, another Yeah, so another thing I want to remind members about is implicit bias. And this is where we might get in trouble unintentionally, just because of some quirks with the way the human brain works. So, okay, let me show you my brain slide. My my boss tells me that the brain slide freaks him out, but I think it's cool. So your brain is taking in tons of information at any given moment, but your conscious brain is only really able to deal with a small bit of it. And so your unconscious mind is doing all this work in the background. For example, let's say you get in the car to drive to work and your mind starts thinking about what am I making for dinner, the meeting I have today, whatever. And this happens to me. You find yourself at work, you don't even remember driving there. Has that ever happened to you? Um, so that's your unconscious brain. Your unconscious brain drove you to work. while your conscious mind was busy thinking about your day. So our unconscious brains do all this work for us. And that's a good thing because there's too much information coming at us all the time for our conscious brains to handle. So this is good, and this isn't something that we have evolved to be able to do. And something that our unconscious brain also does is use shortcuts. So that we can just quickly move through the world. So we see a thing and we know what that thing is. Okay, that's one of those. I know what that is. The problem is instead of having to like analyze each thing you see, you already know, oh, that's you put it in a category. I mean, you can see where this is leading, where it could be a fair housing problem, is when you start putting people into categories, where you start using shortcuts about people. Oh, I know what those people are like. Well, those people always, oh, those people are gonna probably use an FHA loan. I don't want to deal with that. Or, oh, I know where this person wants to live. These type of people like to live in that neighborhood. So
Mhm.
we have to be careful that that unconscious mind doesn't get us into trouble. And our course bias override takes you deep into kind of what your brain is doing. It kind of we go through some interesting exercises where your brain plays some tricks on you, and then you begin to learn about different tactics you can use to interrupt this bias. So let me just show you a couple of those.
Mhm.
So this is all pretty basic fair housing information, that standardization, just do it the same every time. And
Right.
this is a really key thing is let the customer lead. So don't assume, we like to think that we know people, we can read people. Don't assume. Ask questions, ask everybody the same questions, and let the customer lead. This is all stuff that you've seen in your fair housing courses. Use objective information. Don't provide your subjective opinions about things. I know people want to. There's a way that you can still present your clients all the information they need without, editorializing so much and give people choices. So this is all standard fair housing stuff, but to go a little deeper into how do we stop our brains from thinking stereotypically? Okay, we talked about the protocols, but then it's things like individuate. So this is like working on seeing people as individuals and not members of a group. And that's really just about making friends with different people, but not just at work, but really getting to know individuals from groups that are different than you, who have experiences that are different from yours, and going to their home, going to their community, seeing them as individuals and not stereotypes. Then counter stereotyping is another one. Media shows us images of certain groups that portray certain groups, say, as criminals. That isn't really necessarily true. And so we need to take in other images of these groups. I mean, the Cosby Show, in the 80s was a huge example of counter stereotyping. It was the first show on TV that showed like a successful upper middle class black family just, doing normal family stuff. That was counter stereotyping. Perspective taking, trying to walk in someone else's shoes, and peer-to-peer intergroup contact. Again, it's like more socializing. So this is about like the life journey for yourself as a human being to break down those stereotypes. And that's going to help you provide better customer service to everyone if you're really paying more attention to people as individuals and not making stereotypes about them.
Yeah, that's really, really good. And it's a pretty deep subject, right? Because I think, like you said, the way our brain processes it, a lot of that is meant to protect us, right? Just other things in life, but to just be more aware of it and help us make sure that we're doing the best we can for all of our customers and clients. So, with the job of a realtor back, kind of just to button up about best practices and all, with fair housing and our marketing. And I know social media is a big thing, what's posted. NAR kind of had to put in a rule with social media not too long ago, right?
Oh
Why
yeah.
did what was happening there? And I guess why did NAR feel like, hey, we need to put in a rule with what an agent is posting on social media?
Oh, Jose, you're going off script again, but that's okay. I can
Okay.
do it. First, can I talk about fair housing marketing and then we'll
Yeah.
talk about Article 10.5? Is that
Yes,
okay?
absolutely.
All right.
Yeah.
So let me give you my spiel about marketing because I think this is an area where there is so much confusion and people are saying, what words am I not allowed to say? And there's different lists of words circulating with the red, yellow, and green categories. And I want to break down for you all why this provision is in the Fair Housing Act, what it's meant to do, and I hope that's going to help you all understand what what the rule that you apply to figure out what words are allowed and not allowed. Because these lists, I'm sorry to report, there is no authoritative list. There's no HUD list. The lists you see are just made up by different groups. Sometimes they disagree with each other. So be careful relying on those lists, but I'm going to show you how to, put your thinking cap on and we can figure this out ourselves without relying on any lists. So I got a couple of slides on this. Let's talk about why there is a marketing provision in the Fair Housing Act to begin with. So we're going to go back for a little bit of history again. So this is a quote from a member that I interviewed for that article Scott mentioned at the beginning. This member worked in her mom's real estate office in the 1960s, and that was back when the MLS was a paper book. And she was a
Mm,
girl working in her mom's office, and her job on Tuesdays and Thursdays was to put the listings in the book. And she remembered reading in the listings, no Jews, no Catholics, no blacks. And she
mhm,
didn't even think about it. That's just the way things were. So this was in the 60s. So this was just, the Fair Housing Act was passed in 1968. These people are still alive. This is not ancient history. But let me give you one more example about what advertising looked like before the Fair Housing Act. So in this one, this is using kind of code language to tell people that this is an all-white neighborhood. They use this term restricted. It's a restricted neighborhood. And you see here on this pamphlet, they're saying protective restrictions, and they've listed all the restrictions, and one of them is the racial restrictions. So this term, restricted, was another term that was used in advertising to give a signal to people that there are restrictive covenants in this neighborhood. This neighborhood is restricted, and those people aren't allowed to live here. Only our people that we want can live in this neighborhood. So that's why we ended up with this. Here is the marketing section of the Fair Housing Act, and you don't need to read all the legalistic terms, but this last bolded piece is the most important part. It says that you don't want to have an advertisement that indicates a preference, limitation, or discrimination based on the protected classes. So, what does that mean? Indicates a preference, limitation, or discrimination. Well, the courts have created a rule when they get cases, and their question is, would an ordinary reader find that this ad indicates a preference, limitation, or discrimination? Now, who is an ordinary reader? Well, this is a legal fiction that courts make up when they get certain cases and they want to try to analyze how would people react in a situation. They make up this mythical, reasonable, ordinary person. So, in this type of court legal case, the question is, a person of that protected class group, just an ordinary person, so not the most sensitive person, but not the least sensitive person, just the average,
mhm.
ordinary, middle of the road person, would they read this ad and think, I'm getting a preference, limitation, or discrimination from this ad? So let me just give you a couple examples to show you how this analysis plays out. So the first example I'm going to give you is master bedroom.
Mhm.
So HUD declared in the 1990s that master bedroom was not a violation because master bedroom was a term that was just commonly used to describe an architectural feature. And if you use the ordinary reader test, so would the ordinary average black person see master bedroom and think, I'm going to be discriminated against. There is a preference. There is a limitation. Would they get that indication from the term master bedroom? No, they wouldn't.
Hmm.
Most folks read master bedroom and they know what that means. But, some people don't like that term master bedroom. And, they've gotten rid of it on HGTV. Some
Yeah.
MLSs have gotten rid of it. Some folks say, hey, you know what? If people are uncomfortable with this, let's get rid of it. Okay. And that's great, but it's not a violation. Okay.
Right.
Now, let me show. Now, in contrast, Confederate flag. Okay. We've seen some cases where there was a Confederate flag in a listing photo. The seller had that displayed in their home. And let's put our test to it. Would the ordinary average Black person looking at a listing, seeing a Confederate flag displayed in the home, would they think, oh, I might be discriminated against here? There might be a preference or a limitation based on my race? It's
Yeah.
pretty clear that the answer is yes. So this is the test that we apply because when you use these lists of words like Spanish tile, well, that's okay. Is a Spanish person going to read Spanish tile and think, "Oh, they don't want me here"? No.
Oh,
But if your ad says we don't want anyone who speaks Spanish, well, now you have a problem. So lists of words aren't going to get you all the way there. You need to understand this analysis and this reasoning behind why we have this law. So I hope that is helpful for folks.
Alexia,
Now,
oh,
Article
sorry.
10.5, I can get to that next. I'm sorry, go ahead, Scott.
I was just gonna say back to the Confederate flag. We had a situation
hmm.
like that here recently, well, maybe a couple months ago, and I don't remember what the resolve was. I don't, there wasn't any complaints filed, any lawsuits, but I, I I just remember that the Confederate flag was inside the property. So the seller said, well, free speech. It's inside my property. It's not outside the property to dissuade anybody. It's and they gave a reason why they had it and so forth. But I don't any insight on that if it's inside the property.
It doesn't matter. I mean, if a buyer is going to tour the home, they're going to see it, aren't they?
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
Was it in the listing photos?
I don't recall. I don't recall.
That's where the marketing part might come in.
Yeah, I would say if it's in the
If it's
listing photo,
published on your MLS, I mean, you don't want that picture in your MLS.
exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But Article 10.5, Jose, now that's not my area of expertise. I'm not a code of ethics expert. But what I can tell you is that that was adopted in 2020 after we saw a lot of members posting some truly reprehensible content. And
Yeah.
the members decided that we wanted to put some limitations on that. It's still, controversial, and I understand different boards are kind of applying it in different ways, and we may see it evolve. But that
Okay.
that was why that was put in place, and that goes beyond the Fair Housing Act because Article 10.5 applies to your personal, all your social media. But if your personal Facebook page is where you're putting listings, then that's your business page. So that would be covered under the Fair Housing Act, I
Yep.
think. But if it's
And
your
and that
purely
was
personal thing, then a Fair Housing Act wouldn't cover that.
yeah, and that's kind of what just kind of came to my mind when I mentioned it was just that that's where agents do a lot of the mark.
Hmm.
And just when we're talking about best practices, I felt just important, for everyone to know that that's if you're advertising there, it's important to, make sure we're following, not violating fair housing. Earlier, we was mentioned about Fairhaven, and we at here at First Weber, we recently just did the Fairhaven. Alexia, you joined us for an introduction when we did that, and we did that as a group, for the company. And here at my office, we had about 10 to 12 people that did it. Could we just talk a little bit about Fairhaven? I know here our agents were very engaged with it and had just a little bit of discussion afterwards, but it's a powerful presentation. And I guess maybe could we just talk a little bit what it is and how it works and where agents can find it?
Yeah, sure. So I mentioned earlier, and I see a question in the chat, which we can get to after this. Um, I mentioned earlier in the Newsday investigation, we saw agents, who'd been trained and clearly knew what they weren't supposed to do, and they were doing it anyway. And so the idea behind Fairhaven was to not only teach for housing, but also to kind of move people's hearts as well as their minds, and to give fair housing training is often very boring, and it doesn't have to be. I'm on a crusade against boring fair housing training. Fair housing is really interesting. There are so many great
Yeah.
stories. And so that's the way we wanted to present it in Fairhaven. So in Fairhaven, you go into a fictional town, and by the way, this is a free member benefit at fairhaven.realtor. And you go into a fictional town where you go through different scenarios. And we have now in Fairhaven 2.0, which we just launched, our town now has different neighborhoods which have their own histories. And so we really try to create a little sense of place inside the town of Fairhaven. And you're trying to sell homes. You're a real estate agent and you're doing different transactions. And most of the time in Fairhaven is some other party is discriminating against your client. And you have to figure out how to stand up for them and advocate for them. And that's another different spin we put on this is that we're not approaching this from how do I stay out of jail? How do I stay out of realtor jail?
Yeah.
That's the minimum. That is the bare minimum. We're positioning this as how do I help my clients? And, it's about a lot more than your own you not discriminating. There's a lot more going on in the world than that.
Yeah.
So you're going through different scenarios. A lot of times it's someone else discriminating against your client, and you have to figure out the right way to help them. Oh, and I don't know if we have time for me to share one other case.
Please.
Yes.
So let me share one other. I talked about some highly publicized cases, and this was one that was just in the New York Times. Hang on. Here it is. Yeah, let me show you this slide right here. So some of you all might have seen this. This was in the New York Times last summer. Um,
Oh,
and
yeah. Yep.
our very first scenario in Fairhaven is a similar case to this. Um, Here we had a black couple. They were actually a molecular biologist and a nuclear physicist who were trying to buy a condo in Virginia Beach. And they bought it only after a remote viewing. They were in escrow. They came down to Virginia Beach. They lived in Washington, D.C. They came down to Virginia Beach for the inspection, and that was when the seller saw them for the first time. And the seller said, and she was an older woman, said, I don't want to sell my home to black people. I want to cancel the contract. So this is one of those situations where, it's another party. What are you going to do? And unfortunately, in this situation, the agents on both sides did not handle this in a way that prevented this from getting on the cover of the New York Times. So,
Yeah.
first of
Right.
all, I the listing agent, it appears, the told the buyer this. And what ended up happening was that the listing agent got the seller's children involved. Her adult children went and said, Mom, come on now, like we need to sell this house. And they did kind of get her back on board. But at that point, it was kind of too late. And so meanwhile, the buyer had been told these people want to cancel the deal because I'm black. And her
Mhm.
agents didn't give her any advice. And so she went and posted on social media, hey, you guys, these people just said I can't buy their condo because I'm black. What is this? This is crazy. And social media told her about the Fair Housing Act, not her
Wow.
agent. And it
Yeah.
just so happens that this woman has a huge following on social media. because she does children's science education. She's Raven the Science Maven. And so there were lots of eyeballs on this, and that's how it ended up on the cover of the New York Times.
Well, what's interesting about that is that it's incumbent upon realtors by law, by the code of ethics, by uh, many regulations that if there is a fair housing issue, you're supposed to be smart enough to see it, to know it, and take action, not just say, "Whoops," not just look away.
Right.
That's what happened in the agents were kind of left scrambling, and they were trying to fix it, and it all fell apart. So this in Fairhaven, we present these kinds of scenarios so
Right.
that people can feel prepared if this should ever happen to them.
Real quickly,
Yeah.
we just one of the questions in the chat, getting back to seller decor.
Oh yeah.
Since seller decor can cause a lot of possible discriminatory issues, we should ask them to move for pictures or showings. This has come up. This question's come up to me several times, and I said, well, you know, I like how you applied the reasonable reader test to the ordinary reader test, but it's important to have these conversations where, hey, sellers, if you're really serious about selling your house, consider removing some of these items because some people might find them offensive. It's not always about possible discriminatory practices. Some people have really bizarre, creepy artwork, and you know, it, if it's, I understand the subjective nature of these things, but a good agent it's part of staging a house. Get rid of the clutter, you know, and Jose, you can probably speak to this better than I can, but if there's something kind of weird, I know it's subjective, you're better off to tell them, maybe you should consider moving that away. And I just remember too, back to the Confederate flag issue, the guy was uh, he considered it more of an historic document because he collected Civil War stuff, so
Yeah.
that makes it another more interesting twist, but more of a museum-esque sort of viewpoint lens. But I'd still,
Yeah.
advise, if I was the agent, I'd say that could offend some people, and here is why,
Yeah. And I think Danielle had posted
Yeah,
some
Danielle,
example.
did your clients make the offer? I don't know if you want to read Danielle's question, Jose.
Sure, I'll go ahead. So the example, what happened, my clients were a gay couple. Sellers displayed a lot of religious memorabilia. Buyers were concerned sellers would discriminate and not accept their offer. It didn't happen, but was a concern.
Did the buyers actually make the offer and it got accepted?
They did, and they wrote the offer with just one of their names on it, just in case. And then we later
Mhm.
added the second buyer after it was accepted. But, and it turned out it wouldn't have been an issue, but because they saw all of that memorabilia around the house, they were like, we don't know if these people will accept us. So we changed the way we did their offer just because of that.
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
come up here at GMAR, several times, and Alexia, Jose, if you have anything to add, please. But certainly religious freedom is
Right.
is part of the Constitution. It's granted to us as Americans, not abolishment of religion, but freedom of religion. And we see crucifixes and Star of David, and we see these things in properties all the time. Um, I don't know what, it'd be difficult to say what is too much, and and we have to be careful too to stereotype to say, well, if they're a gay couple, that maybe they're not religious. A lot of, there are gay people in clergy, so that's a difficult one. I would be a little careful to tell sellers, better take down those crucifixes, or
Yeah.
whatever you have. Lexia, Jose, what do you think?
Yeah.
I'd like to hear what Jose thinks.
Yeah, no, I mean,
Tough one.
there's freedom of religion is obviously enshrined in our Constitution, and from I'm a religious person, and my family's religious, and it's very common. You go into houses, and I mean, probably me just reflecting on all the houses I've shown over the years, it's almost probably the majority of houses had might have had cross or something. So, it would be unfortunate if that. if someone was discriminated against because of religious view, not, you know, they disagree with someone's sexual orientation or whatnot. But
Then it
yeah,
would
I
be a
don't know how
problem,
that,
yeah.
yeah, I don't know how that would, you know,
Yeah, we don't
um,
know, but if someone were to say, well, it's against my religion or against my religious beliefs that we don't believe that we think homosexuality or gay or being gay is a sin, and we don't want them to buy our house. Well, then that's when you pull out the
that's
fair
yeah,
housing laws and say, well, hold on here, you're entitled to your religious opinion, but here's what the law says.
right. That's a
And
different, that would be a different
and
matter
then from
there.
there,
Yeah.
if I was, advising a realtor, I'd say and if you want to continue down this path, I would speak to your legal counsel
Yeah.
because you could end up getting sued
Yeah. And
Yeah.
and
Great.
the realtor would be held liable too
if they
Yeah.
didn't say anything, right,
if they
Alexia?
continued representing that person.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Good question, though.
Absolutely.
Very good question.
Thank
Okay.
you. Are there any other questions quickly if you want to throw in the chat? Otherwise, I think we're coming up on our hour here and maybe we can have some final thoughts unless there was any other questions.
Uh,
So,
I've
Scott?
got a couple things, and just for conversation, and these are the things that come up real world, and they come up all the time. Realtors are always asked about neighborhoods. Is this a safe neighborhood? I don't want to live in a high crime area. Or I get it, and then a good realtor has the tools in their toolbox. They can direct them to various resources and information. But when a realtor takes it upon themselves to say, I wouldn't live here because it's high crime, that can have
Mm,
fair housing implications. I believe that if you go east of whatever street, that's a higher crime area. I wouldn't move out there because the schools are not good. Those can have fair housing implications. Jose, Alexia, what do you want to add to that? It's very common. It comes up a lot.
Yeah, of course. I mean, the standard advice, as you said, Scott, is to be able to refer those clients to objective third-party sources of information. If they're concerned about crime, you have the whatever it is, crime statistic website that you can send them. If
Mhm.
they're interested in schools, then you can send them information about the schools without, providing your subjective opinion, and they can make an informed decision. Based on the information that you give them without your editorializing.
yeah. I think we have a question here from Dre. Considering political stances, is a realtor able to use their business platforms to discriminate against those who vote a certain way?
Well, here in Washington, D.C., political affiliation is a protected class. I mean, you could see why. Like
Hmm.
people
Yeah.
might not rent to people based on their political party here. Uh, but if it's not a protected class where you are, then I don't think that's illegal.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, if I was selling my home, I couldn't imagine saying, I don't want any Democrats, or I don't want any Republicans, to buy my house.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, fortunately, I think from my own personal experience, um, overwhelmingly, as the majority of the time, it's focused on getting the best price for the home, and it's not really focused, on who's buying the home. And I think it's important when we're working with clients that if it ever creeps into that kind of area to you know, get that reminder about fair housing and hey, look, let's focus on getting the best price for your home and getting the best, you know, result for your home. So, yeah,
Right, and that this brings us back to the business case, right? Like we just want people to make rational,
business.
good decisions, not based on, biases or, that might cause them to lose money, or not get as good of a price as they could have gotten.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that, as we wrap up, the way I'm Hispanic, and the way I look at just the world and the future, thankfully, there are so many champions that come together for fair housing and to continue to, push, the ball forward. And there's, obviously always work to do, but we have come so far, and it's important to acknowledge that so many wonderful people have come together to make it a better place. And that's why, these conversations, and I like the way, Alexia, you put it, fair housing training, we don't want it to be boring fair housing training, right? Um, we want to make it, so that it's interesting for people to learn about, and continue to work together and really just, change hearts and minds to help, you know, just get to a better place. So thank you all.
Thank you both.
Absolutely. And you mentioned the word champions, and you reminded me that NAR is going to be announcing its 2025 Fair Housing Champions this afternoon at 1 o'clock. We're having our Fair Housing Month event on Facebook Live. I'll drop a link in. But I also want to plug
Nice.
our Fair Housing Champion Award and say that if you or someone you know is a Fair Housing Champion, please apply. Nominations will open in June. I'll share a link right now.
That'd be great.
Awesome.
I
Thank
just
you.
want to thank everybody for participating today. A realtor once told me that was very frustrated with some of the behavior in our industry, that this business will never truly be fully respected until the people in this business respect it. And and
Mm,
and a light went off with me because realtors have a very very hard job. It's a fun job. Those who are successful in this business will tell you it's hard work, it's difficult, but it's extremely rewarding. I've been around this industry for 40 years, so I certainly know that, and I know a lot of people are successful in this business, but uh, there are too many people in this business that look to take shortcuts, or it's too easy. In my opinion, I think it's a little too easy sometimes to get into this business. So we're
mm,
always sort of battling that image of pushing that boulder uphill. And if you're out there practicing in an ethical, legal way, it's unfortunate how the poor behavior of a few sort of sort of ruin it for everybody, if to take
yeah.
a third grade way of looking at it. But I really believe that that's so true, that this industry will never truly get the respect it deserves for all the good people in it, until the people in this business learn to respect it. So with that, Alexia, this is great. I'm going to put you on the spot. Would you come back and visit with us again sometime?
Absolutely. It'd be my
All right,
pleasure.
that'd be great.
Awesome.
Jose, you're the
Thank you.
boss. I'm going to turn it over to you to say goodbye.
Yes. So again, Alexia, thank you so much for being with us today. Really appreciate it. Scott, GMAR, thank you for hosting. And everyone, thank you for joining us. Was a really good discussion, and thank you.
Thank you,
We'll see you
everyone.
again.
Bye now.
Bye.
Bye bye.